So what we do, we're doing coach communication. You're going to start the ball rolling, Scott. I feel like you got a lot to get off your chest.
Yeah, bro. Well, I mean, just been prompted, especially with what I did last fall with football, in trying to figure out how you bridge the gap between what we see as performance practitioners and what sport coaches tend to see from a more phenomenological perspective. So being able to meet them where they're at, but also bring them to essentially the water that you want them to drink. And I think what ends up happening is there's kind of a conflation of terms of what they want to be able to see happen versus the reality of what it takes for that to be accomplished. So coaches say, well, I want to play fast, but then they go out there and they mercilessly run them through repetitions of what they're trying to accomplish tactically, not considering the physiological environment that they're designing for the kids is doing everything but enabling them to play fast. And so then being able to show that to them in terms of what's happening in practice and how it's impacting the athlete's abilities to play fast, whether that's sprint distance or explosive distance or entries into max velocity or the max velocity that's attained in a given practice. And, kind of one of the things that I've really come to, especially just on like a day-to-day reporting level, is that a lot of what we have to do is be able to put it into an elevator pitch for the coaches of what happened and what transpired and, how it can be pragmatically influenced for the outcomes that they're trying to derive. So
are you giving them data then, or are you just giving them like a thumbs up, thumbs down, more or less?
Largely, I mean, the experience that we had with football over there was, a lot of what we talked about with eliminating room for interpretation of constraints around how to design practice. So like, one of the things we ran into at William and Mary was we outlined for like a 90-minute practice session, and the gap or the loophole that was found was that it was presumed to be only the full speed stuff was 90 minutes. And then everything else could be done, in addition to that. And we ended up with twice the amount.
The pre-warm-up is just the tip of sport practices.
It is. It's just the tip, and it's only 20% of a game from an on-feet volume standpoint. So, but yes, just the tip. But also, like, one of the, I guess, pieces that I've arrived at, and I've kind of posted about it before, is that really what you're trying to put together for sport coaches is like an elevator pitch about what happened and putting it in a context of a game to say, how much you did, how does that compare to a game? How rapidly did you do it from a density standpoint or a work rate standpoint? And then how intense was it, which depending on your sport, most of us work in field-based sports that you're probably going to look at sprint distance. If you're in a smaller space court sport, you're probably looking more at explosive distance. And then anchoring that on what a game looks like. So you can come back to them and say, our practice was an hour long, but we did 75% of a game worth of volume in that time. And then you look at the sprint distance and you realize they couldn't do anything because they're constantly inherently self-pacing because everything's just constant movement at a 6 out of 10 rather than, what the sport of football is, which is max effort, recover, max effort, recover. So I think that's been one of the bigger pieces that I've started to put together of, give the coaches a couple of action items to focus on, 3 or 4 things at most, and then put it in terms that they understand and meet them where they're at in terms of anchoring it on what the game looks like relative to that.
Is that like preseason? Because obviously in season, if it was me in season, I wouldn't want them exceeding match values in training, because obviously you want training to be the hardest thing they do all week. And we've had with a guy where it was like, we did X amount of routes on air, and it's like, yeah, that's not a fucking good thing.
Yeah, it was definitely through preseason that we were, especially coming off of the fact that we were up until that point with school starting, they were doing, I think they had a week of just workouts, and then the coaches got antsy and they wanted to start doing practice sessions when we didn't think we were having a season. And those were like 3 40-minute sessions a week. And so it was just to illustrate to them, look, here's where we're at. Here's where we need to get to. We can't go from 2 hours of practice over the course of 4 days to doing 2 hours of practice on one day and coming back and trying to do that again the next day and doing it, 3 or 4 times over the course of a week. And so really duration ended up becoming kind of that hard constraint for us. Cause like we've talked about, the best context for, improving at sport is the speed at which you play. Like it's one thing if you're going through a jog through and seeing what's happening, but it's another thing to do it. And you only have tenths or hundredths of a second to make decisions and correctly, or select the correct response of what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to achieve, and then physically carry it out with full speed execution. So we really focus on just constraining it around duration and managing our weekly jumps by the duration of work that we expose them to. And then, I get into this a bit more on the webinar I just finished filming for you all, but then we really kind of structure the content. Huh?
On what website is that webinar?
Strength Coach Network. Check it out for only $1. Link in my bio on my social media.
Is there a promotion right now?
That might be. Do we need to say something about Team Builder?
That we'll get to that. By Team Builder, but what is the promotion?
Which one? Strength Coach Network?
Annual membership.
Oh, bro, there are like 48 total discounted annual memberships left right now.
Yeah.
If you don't run and get yourself 12 months for the price of 8, you are a foolish, foolish coach.
Indeed.
Just use my link.
Code madness, all caps, link in your bio.
Link in my bio.
Or Zach's, or TK's, or JJ's. We can just strip to the waist, oil up, and wrestle for supremacy.
You really could. And that would be a hell of a reunion.
When you reflect on when communication to change coach behavior has not gone well, if you had your time again, what would you change?
Say that one more time.
If you think about times in your career where you have tried to elicit a change in coaching behavior and it has not happened for you, if you could have your time again, what would you change?
Rather than trying to change everything at once, I would focus on the 1 or 2 biggest rocks that have the highest return on investment and trying to make change there and just letting the other bygones be bygones and working to edge it in the direction that it should optimally go over the next couple of years from there.
Like for example,
trying to make, I'm sorry?
Like for example, duration. That I think the second springboard that we did at William & Mary, it was like, just manage the time.
Yeah.
Manage the time.
And as we found out, you can have a 60-minute start to finish football practice with no pre-practice. You can be toes on the line starting warm up, and then you can call it up an hour later, and everyone will feel highly productive for it.
Bro.
Coordinator said it was great practice. It was some of our highest intensities from a sprint distance standpoint. So go figure, there's an inverse relationship between volume and intensity. And it turns out if you want to be able to repeat high intensity outputs, you need to be able to give them the opportunity to express them in the first place.
Get the fuck out of here. Terrence, changing coach behavior. I mean, you've just come from baseball, highly traditional sport. A lot of, that's the way we've always done it. I'm guessing you and, especially Dan encountered a lot of that.
Yeah, but also within the Astros specifically, but because of the organization and nature of how it's set up and the culture, it's very objective. So it's not like a lot of other organizations where like they're more with like there's more just old school kind of mentality. Like Astros, like the OGM, who ended up getting fired for the cheating stuff or resigned, whatever way you want to spin it. Like he basically went in one day when he came in, it was pulled like tapped coaches on the shoulder at practice, apparently, and was like, "You're fired after this practice. Like, go pack your stuff up. We won't need you here anymore." And basically, we just chopped all the heads of anybody that was almost like the old guard. And I was like, we don't need these people here. Like, I want people who are fully objective. We're going to hold this as accountable to like actual outcomes. And anybody who's not like that, like, I don't want them here anymore. I don't know how many people ended up firing in like his first 12 months being there, but it was like a ton. Like the coach I had in AA was the only one still there, and even after 22 years, he's the oldest. But I think every other coach only been there for like 3 years or less at that point.
So basically, the Red Wedding from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, like he was just chopping heads, just
what an episode.
So that made it like that may walk into that environment pretty easy because everyone's being held accountable to like their peer outcomes. The nature of the sport too, being that it's a more outcome-based sport, like it's you either throw hard or you don't throw hard. You get strikes or you don't get strikes. You hit home runs or you hit singles, and like that's it. There's not a lot of other variables. It's interesting what Scott said like about duration. Like I've kind of settled on that's the metric to die on, like where I'm at now, and that's something we're trying to understand. Is like, hey, like we can get a lot done in 90 minutes. We don't need 2 90-minute sessions in a day. And if we can limit that duration, that would do a lot for us overall in terms of like controlling our volumes and controlling our intensities. Again, to understand for us as well as a case of like most coaches never had experience or ever had access to any kind of like data or objectivity to their practice. And so getting them to understand what the practices look like and like the impact that has. And like this, I mean, we just finished a camp that we just like, and put a ridiculous amount of load realistically on the players in a short span of time. So it's like the implications of that, like, hey, like we need these. We had yesterday off the field. Today we traveled. So we obviously doing today. We're having Saturday, Sunday off also. And it's like, hey, like, we need this time off.
Get this rude cunt to fucking mute his mic.
But I think like Scott said though, it's all about just like picking one hill to die on, and in the immediate, pick that one. So if you try to change too many things, they just double down.
Yeah, man. I've obviously had more clubs than Tiger Woods, and Scott's going now. Scott's going to be with a lady, allegedly. Yeah, I mean, you witnessed one of them not going well for me, and I think it was a similar thing for me. It was like I tried to change too many things, whereas like I always say about athletes, it's always better to assume that you're working with morons and occasionally be pleasantly surprised rather than go through life perpetually disappointed. And it's kind of like that with the coaches. Sorry, coaches, but it's like I think it's like that Buddy Morris thing. It's like change one thing, you'll maybe have a chance of doing it. Change two, it's like really slim, and then change three, and it's like fucking good luck with it. Yeah. Zach, what about you, brother?
Well, let's see. In my world and most experience that I've been when it comes to coaches, most of the time you got to treat them like pooper or like most like disobedient, obnoxious toddlers. You got to let them break their toys and say, look, I told you so. This is what was going to happen. And you show them the data. It's just like I was telling some of you guys earlier in the conversation, like I was looking at some of our force plate data, and it's going to be one of those situations like a year from now, like where did we go wrong? Like what did we do? It's like, well, we did X, Y, Z, and it decreased performance and injuries went up, or so forth and so on and so forth. So when it comes to that, it's almost like treat like a third grader. You're showing them like, hey, like this is what you did, like this is what's wrong, and this is how we fix it. In terms of, I think that's probably been like my biggest case where I've been coming from, like in terms of like driving performance and driving interventions and teaching other coaches that don't come from a background that we do about performance. But the reality is a lot of the strength coaches on my side of the profession are just as bad as sport coaches. Like, let's work harder. Let's do more. Champions do extra. The reality is, do they really? I mean, listen, how many stories do you hear about Michael Jordan in the casino or Tiger Woods, like, I don't know, like sticking his willy in every wet hole he could find or like whatever. Like,
hear me out, right? Hear me out.
When it was time to work, but it was time to play. It was time to play.
When Tiger Woods stopped towing, it was 10 years before he won a major again. Think about that. Look into it.
People need demons. 100%.
And it goes back to this conversation to where, like, Kier, you mentioned it before, like, coaches, and like I know you said like a specific sport, but I think coaches in general would rather, I think it's a more general statement. Coaches would rather work hard and lose than do what the bottom line necessary possible to win and drive performance. They'd rather work hard and say, I did everything I could and lose and I just wasn't good enough. They'd rather do that than knowing this, and I'll be better. So it's just kind of like teams like, or desk guarding, all these different things. So, but like when it comes to like actual like case examples, I guess, like one, like being able to show them like, hey, like you broke your toy, this is how we fix it. And then two, I know like me and TK, and I guess all of us have talked about, when you look at like, when you have a staff of like multiple coaches, you're creating relationships and things like that with like subordinates and position coaches and things like that, or specific like more task role coaches, to where, hey, even though we can't control the technical tactical outcomes of practice or what we're actually planning, but you control Jimmy and Johnny and Joey's reps of what they're going to do. So, Big Papa Joe or whatever, like, he's going to crush the kids, but we really need to keep Jimmy fresh for Saturday. Let's make sure we take care of Jimmy today and tomorrow. And then therefore it's not like a holistic buy-in for the whole entire department or the whole entire team, but long term, like, you save a couple kids here and there, the reality is, even in American football, if you got a quarterback, you probably got a fighting chance.
JJ, I'm guessing most of your issues are the friggin' outside the school, like all the sports teams and.
Yeah, normally just trying to coordinate everyone on the same page. I guess you get a few of the coaches as well. I don't think it matters on the level the coach will believe in what they do. And I guess for me, I mean, you'll have far better examples than I will, but the Elenkus method or the Socratic method is probably the method I'll go to in trying to show sports coaches where we should be going. As Scott says, you've got to meet them halfway with the language that you're using. If you're talking if I'm talking French and you're talking Spanish, neither of us are going to help each other. But, if I can distinguish what you mean by, I don't know, A point, and then we can go through B, C, D, and they don't line up with A, well, okay, you're fundamentally wrong. Let's maybe look at something a bit different. I probably wouldn't put it that bluntly. It doesn't work like that.
I had one of those. That ended with the coach slamming a door on me in front of the entire staff room, because it was what it was. He came in and he's like, "Yeah, the boys don't like your training, and they're not strong enough or fit enough, and you need to change how you work." So then he tried to get into an argument with me in front of the staff, tell me I didn't know my job. And he's like, "Okay, well, here's what I think." And I was like, "Okay, here's how you're wrong." And I put it out to him. I did it, stuff like that. And he's like, "Okay, so how should it be laid out?" And I basically laid out the opposite of what we were doing. And he's like, "Well, why aren't we doing this?" And I said, "Because you told me not to." And then he went fucking slammed the door.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. It can end up as well with just, yeah, but I just want to do it that way. Or that's how we're doing it. That's the, and then
you've got to get it in writing.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, it's funny, multiple of you guys have brought up the time and duration is the easiest way, like, to control volume and things like that. And I know but I've literally seen a football staff do the same amount of work over a 3.5 hour practice in 2 hours, where density of practice doubles. So
that's probably good. That's probably good.
Do not bring out these bullshit absolute terms of, just control time durations and our volumes will be okay. I've literally watched a Division I football staff do the same amount of yardage, player load, decrease HSR, all the intensity pieces of practice, but player load per minute, density of the practice fucking doubles. And this is in the back half of the season after there's already like a chronic onset of fatigue and decrease in performance. And, thank God, like, nobody blew up and died, and we didn't walk through a minefield. But let's not speak in absolute terms here, please.
Well, what it is, I think it's like the reason that we implemented that was, easy, medium, hard is in the eye of the beholder, and a sport coach that wants to lie to themselves like, "Oh, this is easy," one may set it way harder than it needs to be, and then obviously it's going to creep up because it's human nature. You see it in jiu-jitsu all the time. It's like, "Oh yeah, we'll go easy." But no, I want to fucking beat you, so I'm going to go hard. You're going to go harder, and then it's that arms race. And it's like, with time, in theory, in time, you either went over or you didn't. And there's going to be a limit to how much work you can perform per unit of time. So clearly, what you're describing is 3.5 hours. They were just standing around with their finger up their ass, and then they realized they could actually get that work done in 2 hours.
I completely agree with you, but
yeah.
It can be done. But yeah. I will say this in terms of like high level practicing of what we're talking about. I know there's a team in the ACC. Obviously in the ACC, it's high level collegiate football. Their head strength coach stands behind the head coach between every play during every series of practice with a stopwatch and counts as counts the rest between plays, the rest between series, and the time for each play. And he comes from the Buddy Morris tree, and he does a hell of a job. And I know there are teams that are doing it the right way, at least in my side of the sport.
Yeah, I've heard similar with regard to like buzzers and stuff like that. That was actually one thing that I stole from football. Having heard it before in football, in rugby, I tried to bring into rugby just to manage coach activity. But it's like one thing I struggle with is like most things, it's like getting someone to agree with you logically in the cold light of day, and then getting them to follow through on that logic when emotion becomes involved is way, way different. Because you can, it's human nature. You can say, oh, this is a good idea. And they'll be like, yeah, it's all right. Time to pay the price. But this is different. So second topic for today. Let's I think it was suggested by the boy Anthony. If you could have dinner with anyone living or dead, not gonna extend beyond sport, because everyone normally says like fucking Jesus or Gandhi, which is kind of shit. We'll go sporting world. Let's say you can have one or two people. Who would it be and why? From the sporting world, dead or alive? We'll go TK.
Damn, that's hard. Give me Muhammad Ali, and give me Muhammad Ali and Jon Jones. But give me Jon Jones. Give me Jon Jones before. I don't want now Jon Jones. I want getting pulled over Jon Jones.
You want the first Gustafsson fight, Jon Jones?
Yeah. That's
like, hey, are you gonna train for this world title fight? Yeah.
I want the two very polar opposites of people, essentially.
You say that though. You remember the Thriller in Manila?
That is true.
Thriller in Manila. He was. I think he's been married 3 times. Ali. His second wife found out that he had a mistress when he was introducing his mistress to the president of the Philippines. She's like, "What the fuck?"
Allegedly. So
it just goes. You can be really, really good and be a really moral person in some regards, and be so.
How you do one thing is not how you do everything.
Huh? JJ. JJ, who you invited to dinner, bro?
TK stole one of them with Ali, because I think he springs to mind probably for most people with how he transcended sport and politics. Shit. I mean, to be fair, like TK might know who he is, but Johnny Wilkinson did a super interesting conversation on another podcast about like mindset and where he is, and it was kind of blew my mind. I had to listen to it about 5 times to get my head around most of it. Like belonging and like sense of self and stuff like that. It was, really deep. It was pretty much nothing about sport. And for someone like that who's, been through the highest highs and probably the lowest lows of sport, it was pretty cool to see someone go into that depth of, philosophy and mindfulness. So yeah, it'd probably be him and Ali. I don't think you could turn down Ali.
Kobe too. RP.
Kobe, bro, you love Kobe, eh?
Yeah.
Zachary.
All right, so I guess I got 2 lists. If I'm going to dinner to have fun, I'm taking Joe Namath and Karl Malone.
Oh yeah.
I'm taking Joe Namath.
Is Karl Malone party? I thought Karl Malone was going hunting.
Exactly, because Karl Malone's a picker from Louisiana. We go shoot shit, and we're gonna go hunting, and we're gonna go fishing. Then when we go to dinner, the after party,
all the beer.
Good time, right? Anybody rip sticks on the sideline in between series of winter Super Bowl is a dude by me.
Sure.
My stereotypical strength coach cultural list is I'm gonna go Pat Tillman, and then what's his name? He played linebacker for the Borland, played linebacker for Wisconsin, and walked away after being defensive rookie of the year from Wisconsin because of CTE concerns. I'd be interested to have a legitimate conversation about introspective and existentialism and things like that.
Oh, that's heavy. And I go, I think like, I think for me, like Magic Jordan is pretty interesting, just because one thing that I've found the longer I coach is and it happened to me a little bit, which is you end up defining yourself through your work, and the athletes that struggle the most as they transition out of becoming an athlete are the ones where their entire identity is wrapped up in being an athlete. And it's tough enough when they make that decision themselves to stop being an athlete. But when it's kind of like you're told like, oh, you're no longer an athlete, that must, a lot of athletes really struggle with that. And I think, for him to be like such a high level athlete and then to be told, oh yeah, which, at the time, HIV was like a death sentence. They were like, oh, not only are you not an athlete anymore, you might not be alive within 10 years. And he basically didn't miss a beat and just kind of like redefined himself as a businessman. And now I think he's a part owner in the Lakers. I thought that's pretty interesting. And I remember seeing a post that he'd shared on Instagram, and I think they'd asked him to write out his goals when he was like 10 or 12 years old. And it was like play basketball, travel the world, run my own business, which I thought was pretty interesting, just to have those goals outlined when he was such a young kid and still saw them through to completion. I'd also like to find out how he got HIV, what kind of lifestyle he was living.
Speaking of that topic, nobody brought it up, but knowing that there's a lot of stories and myths, but not a lot of historical evidence. Wilt fucking Chamberlain.
Oh my God. 10,000 women, allegedly. 10,000 women is like.
Apparently was a literal pimp.
Hey, the possibility, how much the percentage of the relations of the NBA population right now to Wilt Chamberlain would be interesting. How many of those guys are direct?
It's like the Genghis Khan of the NBA.
but here's the thing. They say like what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? What happens if Wilt Chamberlain meets that chick from the Suns? The one that had that evening with the like 8 players from the Phoenix Suns, allegedly.
I was like, first I was like, who? And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that they interview.
Yeah. Let me think. Like fun business dinner invite. Who would I pick? Ocho Cinco, bro. Love the vibe. Ocho Cinco.
That'd be an interesting one.
I don't.
He's interested on that Brandon Marshall's podcast, like because he's like a regular. I think he's like part host with Brandon Marshall. Like, and that's like he said some interesting things on there. I think it's a pretty decent podcast.
I would rather have dinner with Brandon Marshall. If you gave me Chad Johnson or Brandon Marshall, I'd go dinner with Brandon Marshall for sure.
Yeah.
Cool, boys. All right. Why Team Builder? Also, strengthcoachnetwork.com annual membership. Use the code MADNESS, all caps, to get $50 off. Limited to 50 spots. And